The following audio-supported podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. Please speak to a healthcare professional before making any treatment decisions. The guests on today's show were paid to participate in this podcast.
What's up, Cheat Codes listeners? It's me, Dr. Z.
And me, Dr. C.
Dr. C, we continue on in what has become a tradition, which is honoring legends of sickle cell disease.
These are some of my favorite episodes.
I totally agree, man. And we haven't done a global leader in quite some time. Maybe not even ever. This might be the first international legend that we're bringing on the show.
I think you're right.
And it's incredible because, the person that we're bringing in is Dr. Miguel Abboud. And Dr. Miguel Abboud is a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But the one thing that's undisputable is that his fingerprints are all over what sickle cell care looks like currently.
Definitely. I was going through Dr. Abboud's CV last night, his resume, and there are hundreds of papers on there and manuscripts.
Yep.
And I've known Dr. Abboud for a long time now. I learned some things that he was involved in that were, fundamental to my training.
Absolutely.
Things like the STOP trial.
Yep.
That he was, involved in. That really changed the landscape of how we treat people with sickle cell.
I'm really excited to dive into the conversation. Before we do, for the warriors who may not know Dr. Abboud, we should point out that he is professor of pediatrics with tenure at the American University in Beirut, in Lebanon, where he also is the chair of pediatric hematology oncology. Dr. Abboud, we are just over the moon to have you on Cheat Codes today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
It's absolutely an honor and a privilege. You and I have a very casual, friendly relationship, and sometimes I also forget the amount of sweat, blood, and tears that you've literally put into this community, and we want to make sure we acknowledge you for that.
Thank you.
For those warriors who are listening to this podcast, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story. How does this all start? Where does the story of Miguel Abboud start?
Well, it starts when I was a resident in the mid-'80s, or actually early '80s, at the American University of Beirut. And I was very interested in hematology, particular two diseases, sickle cell and thalassemia, which are both very common in Lebanon. And at that time, I was impressed really by three patients, one of whom was a child with a tumor that could have been cured with a bone marrow transplant, except transplants were not available in Beirut at that time. The other was a child with thalassemia who died of iron overload. And the third was a young man with sickle cell disease who had the most horrible, multiply recurrent pain crisis. Now, you have to realize this was at least 10 to 15 years before hydroxyurea.
Yeah.
And, that young man remains with me till today. Wow. And I said I have to go specialize. So I finished my residency. I came to the U.S.
Yeah.
Then I got a faculty position in South Carolina, in Charleston, where also there was a very large sickle cell population. By that time, the issue of thalassemia had been somewhat resolved. They were getting better care than the sickle cell patients. There was iron chelation, transfusions had become relatively safe.
Yeah.
And iron chelation prolonged people's lives, troublesome as it was. For sickle cell disease, there was absolutely nothing. There was absolutely nothing. And I remember I moved to South Carolina, and the first thing I was confronted with, there were about 30 plus patients who had had a stroke, who were receiving transfusions without any iron chelation.
Oh my.
So we started our iron chelation program for the very heavily iron overloaded patients. And we published this eventually as what was then and still now considered as very high dose desferoxamine to get the iron out of those sickle cell patients. And actually, people think that sickle cell disease, the iron overload pattern is different. It does not involve the heart. And statistically, that's correct. It involves the heart less often than in thalassemia. But you transfuse them long enough and hard enough, and you have patients who develop cardiac hemosiderosis.
Yeah, sure.
And we did have a patient like that. We actually did a biopsy to prove it. And then we completely removed the iron from her with high-dose desferal and so on.
Agios is a biopharmaceutical company that's fueled by connections with patient communities, healthcare professionals, partners, and each other. Building on these connections and the company's unmatched leadership in PK activation, Agios is pioneering therapies for rare blood disorders, including PK deficiency, thalassemia, and sickle cell disease. To learn more, visit us at agios.com. That's AGIOS.com. To join the conversation with other patient allies, follow us on Instagram at Ally Voices Rising. That's Ally, ALLY, Voices Rising.
Now, subsequent to that, issues were very complicated. And there were, again, I have to tell you, this was before hydroxyurea was shown and proven to be available for even adults.
So we're talking early 90s now.
We are talking actually mid-80s.
Mid-80s.
I moved there in 86. And so we decided, in what was a very unusual move at that time, to transplant patients with sickle cell disease. And we transplanted about 8 patients or 9 patients. But the very first one, it was a really difficult problem. There were a lot of ethical issues concerned.
Okay.
I mean, do you offer this therapy that could be potentially life-threatening? And I remember we devised a mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
We had a board of 4 experts who reviewed every case that we took to transplant.
Wow.
And said, yes, this is worthwhile. And I remember Bill Menzer of the Menzer Index fame was on the board. Kevin Shannon was on the board, and 2 other people. And so we transplanted those patients. And I remember we had the first patient we transplanted at the ASCAT conference 2 years ago. Remember, she came
we
out
had dinner with her.
and it's she did extremely well. This again, little girl who reminded me of the young man who was in constant pain all the time.
Yeah.
And she now doesn't relate to it. And it's another important thing, that this leads to on a scientific level. We really need to get these people and do long-term follow-up stories. And then I've had 3 other patients since then reach out to me. They are all doing extremely well, but many of them are kind of quote-unquote lost to follow-up.
For sure.
And it would be very good, 20 plus years, 25 plus years down the road to see how is their end organ function.
Absolutely.
And these are the kind of data that we are lacking in sickle cell disease. We really need to offer curative therapies and have very long-term follow-up.
I'm with patients. You. Yeah, I'm totally with you.
And that at that time, St. Jude's had transplanted somebody who had sickle cell and leukemia.
Yes, actually.
But really, nobody was transplanting sickle cell.
She actually, Mark Walters started doing transplants shortly after we did the first 2 patients.
Okay.
And we also got involved, and we reported this. You guys probably don't remember this, but there was a time when there were 10 sickle cell centers mandated by the
NIH.
And I remember I reported the very first 2 cases in Philadelphia at the sickle cell center meeting, and the late Kwaku Ohene Frimpong was chairing the session. And we also got involved at that time in asking really very fundamental questions about sickle cell disease. And these I work very closely with Elliot Wyszynski on.
Oh, yeah.
How do you prepare people for surgery?
Right.
And that study came out showing that you did not need to exchange
Yeah, correct.
everybody, that simple transfusions were enough. God knows people faulted us for not having a non-transfusion arm.
I see.
But again, it
unethical.
would have been too difficult to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
And we collected data on those patients. Subsequent to that came the question, what is acute chest syndrome? And we participated in the acute chest study. These were the first studies
Amazing.
I worked on. And, we did bronchs on everybody.
Yeah.
As a subgroup of patients on that study, we looked at cytokines
Okay.
in the lung of patients with sickle cell
Wow.
disease, and we published. And it's funny, sometimes people publish that and they forget, they
Sure.
reinvent the wheel, they
Yeah,
look.
Those are 2 New England Journal papers I tell all of my fellows about
But
still.
the cytokine study in the lung is actually published in British Journal of Hematology, and people have since repeated that
Yeah.
without knowing that it had already been done. So I really think we need to constantly remind people of what has been done in the field.
Well,
And
my friend, you have over 200 publications. There's a lot of contribution to keep track of. But I want to bring the story back to you for a second. I want to recenter on you. In this story arc, you dropped us at the start of your residency.
Mhm.
I'm kind of interested in what happened before that. Tell us a little bit about Dr. Miguel Abboud growing up. When did you realize you want to be a doctor? When did that sort of vision come to you? And
I grew up in Brazil, and in a city in the inland in Brazil, in the state of Minas Gerais. And then when I was 10, we moved to Lebanon,
yeah,
and I attended school there. Not unlike the U.S., secondary education is one continuum. I did the British system. And very early on, I got interested in biology and biochemistry, and at one point in time, I thought I wanted to go to do a PhD in biochemistry.
yeah,
But somebody I know in the family, they said to me, "Look, why don't you become a doctor?
yeah,
And if you still want to do research that's not close to you, can always go do biochemistry research." And then I started shadowing people at the American University Hospital while I was in high school, and I really got interested in medicine, and that's when I did that.
You have a very unique story in terms of your exposure sort of internationally to different cultures, different people. Does that sort of influence now how has that played into your clinical expertise, your sickle cell expertise? Has that added to it? In what ways?
Actually it has. And there is a unique feature of sickle cell disease, which I find somewhat baffling. No matter where you go, sickle cell disease and people with sickle cell disease are always the underdog. Now, of course, in places like the US or Europe, you can say, well, that's because of racism. But you go to somewhere like Lebanon, where the people with sickle cell disease are white, and still there is a lot of, I wouldn't say discrimination, but they are not treated as well as they could be. It may be that the disease is a chronic disease that requires pain management, and of course people who are repeated users kind of, but again, wherever you go,
the underdog.
This is always they wait longer in the emergency room, and the problem repeats itself in every culture I've seen. Regardless of the color of the skin of the patient who has it. And I guess with racism and the other stereotypes, it gets worse, but it's always there. And this is something that really has impressed me quite a bit, and we're working very hard in Lebanon to improve that, especially at our hospital.
One of the things I really admire about you is your continued desire to experience, sickle cell disease in terms of how your colleagues see it and the way you attend sort of conferences in places where you typically don't think about sickle cell disease. Mexico, right? People often forget about the Indian subcontinent. People forget, they don't forget, but they don't really actively participate in places like Nigeria or Kenya. Your travels have taken you to a lot of these places, but this underdog story you feel like continues to exist wherever you are.
Look at India. You know, the people with sickle cell there blend into the general population, but they are in the tribal territories of India. Now there's been a lot of government interest in India in that. I just learned about this. And they are funding centers that take care of benign hematologic diseases. And they've bundled sickle cell together with hemophilia, and they're making significant steps forward in that area. And apparently the Prime Minister is personally involved in encouraging this. So we're really looking at that experiment, to see how well it goes. And Nigeria, the world's cradle of sickle cell disease, huge problems, large numbers of people. Again, it is mainly a community-driven effort to improve the lot of patients with sickle cell disease. Again, the federal government of Nigeria has taken upon itself to fund now centers or to legislate funding centers of excellence for sickle cell disease. And I've learned from all these experiences, and hopefully in Lebanon, we can get some funding for one or two centers of excellence in the disease.
How did you get involved in all of that? And going from Lebanon to South Carolina, and how did you get involved in sickle cell in Mexico and Africa?
In Mexico, there wasn't any sickle cell. I was there mainly for benign hematology diseases. And I was really looking, they asked me to, I'm part of the International Pediatric Association, and they were having a meeting there in collaboration with the International Society of Pediatric Oncology. So I went there with my oncology hat and my benign hematology hat. But I learned that in Mexico there are very few patients with sickle cell, mainly along the northern border with the United States. So this was the only travel that wasn't really sickle cell focused. But then, since then, I went to Nigeria and for the Impact Africa Summit, which is held every year. And we met with the patient groups and really, I don't know if you know this, but we have a partnership, ASCAT, has a partnership with Exene, which is a CRO in Nigeria, and they organized this meeting. Really, the meeting was very, very good. And we spoke about the need to do more research in low and middle income countries. Talked about the need of the low and middle income countries to organize themselves, both to develop enforceable legislation that would regulate clinical research, to develop centers of excellence where patients actually would get care before you move them into clinical trials. And it was a very, very well-structured program that they had. I hope it has some impact. This is I first went there with Professor Baba Inusa a long while back, and we held a national meeting in Abuja. And then, lots of things intervened. And this was my second time, other than the global meeting. And hopefully we can continue this effort to do something in that setting.
I have a question that kind of piggybacks on what Dr. Callaghan was just mentioning, which is your involvement in sort of various geographic areas. I'm very curious about, as you're going through your formative period as a sickle cell physician, when you think back to your early days, who are some of the sickle cell doctors that helped you understand and build foundational understanding of sickle cell disease management? Like, who do you look up to as you were coming up as a sickle cell doctor when you think back on other legends?
I think of Elliot Vichinsky. I think of Samir Balas, with whom I worked very closely for a while. I think of Tom Kinney. I think of Kwaku Ohene Frimpong. Sam Sharash is somebody who very few people remember. but he is the first author,
Yes,
and he
he is.
led
Yeah.
the work on hydroxyurea, and Ora Platt then at Harvard.
Yeah.
Also, I think Dr. Clarice Reed, who was the director
Sure.
of the Sickle Cell Center at the NIH, and she really did a lot
Yeah.
to get the community organized. And one thing that all of these people had in common is that they had solid clinical backgrounds and very solid clinical research. Shouldn't forget my very good friend, Dr. Robert Adams,
Yeah.
who had the inspiration. He's a stroke neurologist, and he had the question, why are sickle cell patients having strokes? And that led him to investigate cerebral blood velocity. He found that most of the patients who had strokes had high cerebral blood velocities, and then randomized to transfusion versus no transfusion.
Yeah.
Okay, and this led to significant improvement in the quality of life of children with sickle cell, because stroke is now a preventable disease.
And that was with you at MUSC in South Carolina.
He was in Augusta when that happened. He eventually moved. Now, this was followed very closely by the baby hug study. Win Wong
That's right.
and Russell Ware, who
Yeah.
was a good friend. And again, all of these things had a major impact on sickle
Absolutely.
cell disease. And honestly, ever since those days, we are now looking for drugs that are going to make a similar impact.
Yeah.
We have transplants, now we have gene therapy.
Right.
But again, the accessibility of these treatments to people with sickle cell disease is still low. Look, hydroxyurea is not available to most of the sickle cell patients in the world.
Even still.
Yeah, even in the US,
Yeah.
fewer than half the patients are on the drug when the recommendation is clearly there. In other countries, forget about it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's very difficult even to get the drug. Safe blood products in sub-Saharan Africa is a major issue. We had a long discussion about this in the latest meeting
Yeah.
in Nigeria. So really, we need to focus on the science and the accessibility of treatment to patients with sickle cell disease. I think
Yeah,
these
it's a
are the
beautiful
two
thought.
areas that need the most work. I know nowadays, and I'm involved in this, people are very involved. What do we monitor? How do we measure outcomes? Yeah, these are all important questions, but in my mind, they really take a back seat.
Yeah.
If you have countries where you have hundreds of thousands of patients, most of whom cannot afford hydroxyurea,
Right.
I mean, and we are really looking at endpoints and not. It seems a little bit esoteric.
Yeah.
Not to say that it's not important, but I really think we should be focusing on first things first, get the current available treatments to patients, and two, develop new treatments that could be accessible to the majority of patients.
One thing I've always noticed about Dr. Abboud is when I see him at a meeting, he's flanked by 2 or 3 young people
Yeah.
who he's brought to the meeting. He's always, promoting
That's true.
trainees.
So true.
One of the, I think, most important things about being a legend in sickle cell is being a mentor for the next generation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm very happy finally. Well, in South Carolina, 2 of my former fellows, Shayla Bergman, whom you now
Yeah,
know,
that's right.
she's holding the fort there, holding
That's
the
right.
program together.
You're doing a great job.
And I've had now 4 mentees who went on to they're going on to develop research careers
Amazing.
in and of themselves in the field. One of them, Dunya Hataba,
Yeah.
is now organizing a workshop on, of all things, endpoints
Clinical
and
trial
outcomes.
endpoints. That's right. Today.
At ASH. So I'm
Yeah.
going to go attend that and see what, but I'm very, very proud of her for doing that. Rawan Karaman also, and we've had a number of people who are now getting involved in this work.
All right, Dr. Abboud, I have one final question for you.
Uh-huh.
If you look back at your career, if given the opportunity to do this over again, would you choose sickle cell disease again?
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's a big challenge. You know, I'm involved in pediatric cancer, and you know the tremendous advances that have been made there. But then all of a sudden, also it's at a standstill. You know, there's no investment in that next level. In fact, now in pediatric cancer, we're benefiting from advances being made by adult oncologists, whereas in the past the opposite was true. In sickle cell disease, it seems that investment in treatments is also being very, very slow in coming. And again, it hasn't helped that we've had a couple of setbacks. But what disease that's as complicated as this hasn't had setbacks? But we need to keep on plowing forward. And again, we need to keep the pressure so that accessibility to care is achieved. And once that's achieved, you know, to be blunt, once the money is there, the research will follow.
Absolutely.
But people are going to say, well, we are going to develop these very expensive treatments for these diseases.
Yeah.
Who is going to benefit from them? And unless we really have accessibility at the center of our interests,
That's right.
you know, it's going to be problematic. And from this perspective, I think the leadership of countries like Saudi Arabia is important because it's kind of unique. They have the populations with hemoglobinopathies,
Right.
and they have the means.
True.
And they're going to really show the rest of the world that if you invest, you're going to be able to
Good things happen.
control this disease in ways that haven't been seen before.
Dr. Abboud, you know, there are not enough words to express our gratitude on behalf of the community for everything you've done in sickle cell disease. As Mike was just saying, Dr. C, you eloquently put it, it's your fingerprints are on everything that happens in clinics day to day around the world. Your impact is unmeasurable in that way. And once again, we're so just honored that we got to spend a little bit of time with you today to talk about your story.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. C, another
Dr. Z.
legend of sickle cell disease.
That was great. I'm afraid we didn't even scratch the surface. There
It
was
was-
so much more we need to talk about.
It was totally not enough
but
time.
We'll have to have another episode.
And I knew you were itching to get more and more into the data and the papers and the clinical trials. And,
No, I like hearing the backstory too. So.
you know, hopefully we'll have Dr. Abboud on one more time and try to get to the rest of it, get deep into the science.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, Sickle Cell Warriors, I hope that you enjoyed that episode. As always, if you think somebody could benefit from hearing Dr. Abboud's story, share this episode. Make sure you like and subscribe to Cheat Codes. You can always follow me at Dr. Z Sickle Cell.
And me at Imagineer.
With that, keep living well with sickle cell. We'll see you soon. Peace.